Maya Sigel, your production designer for Hello Tomorrow, which takes place in a futuristic version of the 1950s. What were your initial thoughts about being able to blend the retro with the futuristic?
Yeah, so I think my initial thoughts, luckily, really were in line with the directors and the showrunners in the sense that we wanted it to be this retro futuristic world that was imagined from the lens of the 1950s. So everything is really kind of grounded in the picture of the future as you would see it in the 50s. And that's sort of where I started with the research process as well.
And where did that research take you? Like how deep into like the rabbit hole did you go for 1950s Americana?
Very deep. And it never stopped. You know, I was on the show for about 9 months, and I started the research before I started prep, and I didn't really stop until the very end. And really it was so fun to look at all of these old films, old animation from the era, lots of catalogs, World's Fair photos, postcards of roadside architecture, and I looked at a lot of photography and architecture books as well. And yeah, there was just really sort of no end to where we could grab inspiration from, which was great.
Now, since this is an alternate version of the 1950s, were you able to take more liberties than you might have? Were this not a straight period piece? Besides the robots, of course.
Yes, absolutely. So that was really freeing as well, because it's not a strict period piece and it's not a documentary. And so there was just really, the playground was a lot larger for me and my team. And so it really kind of pushed everyone to look from really the 30s through the late 60s when we were looking for inspiration and research. And so we would just, I would sort of use things that felt like they were part of the era, but it could have been, we could use something and modify it that was a prop that maybe was manufactured in 1965, and that was okay. That fit into our world. And really one of my biggest inspirations was really in the gadget design was the Art Deco era, at the streamline movement, and looking at all of this. It was this period of where designers were making everything look like it could fly, and everything had this sleek aerodynamic shape to it. So I thought that really worked and spoke to our gadgets that are mostly hovering in our world.
The show really immerses us in this world from the very first scene with Jack, played by Billy Crudup, doing his sales pitch for his timeshares on the moon, and it's this diner bar that has this, again, this retro futuristic kind of vibe to it. How important was that space, and what went into creating that?
Yeah. So are you referencing sort of the first time he meets the customer at that diner bar, or when he's
Yeah.
in the rotunda, sort of that first bar? Yeah, when he gives him the pamphlet. Yeah, so what we loved about that was to sort of setting it in this classic East Coast American diner, and then adding something like, I knew that I wanted to have an automat somewhere in the show, and that is heavily featured in the bar of the Vista Motor Lodge, which is our main set. And so once I sort of had that design element there, I thought if we see any other bars, it should also have something of that as well. So you have this, plexi box with all of the drink names and the bottles upside down, and you have our bar bot that is sort of going back and forth behind the counter of the diner. And it's also kind of grounded in our warmer color palette in our show is used for the earth. And then everything that's a little bit more futuristic and of the moon is sort of in a cooler palette. So in the diner you have, it's very warm, but then you have that plexi and some of the shiny surfaces that we use in our futuristic elements.
Now, you mentioned the Vista Motor Lodge, where the much of the show takes place. Characters spend much of their time there. I understand that lodge was built for the show. How big an undertaking was that, and what did you want to bring to that?
Yeah, so that, from the minute I read the pilot script, I knew that that was really our anchor and that we were going to be spending a lot of our season in the Vista Motor Lodge. And it just, even before we scouted, I sort of knew that this wasn't going to exist in New York. And so I was already thinking about what it might look like and the different spaces. So, it's really design-wise, conceptually, the Vista Motor Lodge was the bridge for me between the two worlds, between the future of the moon and space travel and the old world of Vistaville. So you have these curved lines, you have the Vidicon booths in the lobby, you have the automat in the bar, you have, the bots running around and the gadgets. But it was also important to me to have, a lot of wood and earth tones, and my scenics did a beautiful job sculpting river rock because that was inspired by sort of the googie architecture of the diners on the West Coast and the motels on the West Coast, which I wanted to sort of bring to the East Coast. So yeah, it was a really large set. It took up pretty much all of the space that we could use on our main stage. And we had the lobby, the bar, diner, a lounge area, the conference room where our team sets up to sell the timeshares, the lunar timeshares. And then you could walk through the hallway and down to one of our motel rooms. So it was really nice because the actors and the crew really had a chance to set up shop there. And it was a really nice compliment to have directors come in and say, oh, we still feel like there's angles that we haven't shot in here that look good.
And what makes the show futuristic, of course, is all the technology that we see interspersed throughout the series. What were some of your favorite of those details and gadgets and robots and all of those really playful elements?
Mm-hmm. So first of all, I just loved that, from really in the pilot script, a lot of the gadgets are introduced and you can see them in the first episode. And there is this whimsical quality to them. A lot of the gadgets are sort of superfluous and they help people, but in these little ways that you don't necessarily need. I loved I think the first one that I really tackled were the Vidicons and the Vidicon booths, which are basically like the retro futuristic version of FaceTime. And so it was really important to me to kind of establish that, and then we could go from there. And so the Vidicons are these clunky screens, they needed to have, I felt like they needed to have some weight. There needed to be all of these analog buttons, and we designed them on a wooden base so that they could also be practically mobile, and then we could populate the world with them. We had booths, they were in people's homes, they're just in public places all over. So that really kind of informed the rest of them. And then from there, you know, another element that was that you can see in the designs of all the gadgets is the dome. And so our lunar residences are under a clear plastic dome. And I wanted to bring that to a bunch of the devices too. So, you know, you see that with when they're at the Jetball Stadium and they're having popcorn. There's, you know, it's a self-popping popcorn machine, and you know, you lift the dome off and you get your fresh your popcorn. It's called the Kernel Fresh. So yeah, all of those elements, they were all fun, honestly. And my prop master Eric Charipka was a mad scientist, and really so much of it was done practically. And then our VFX supervisor, you know, spruced things up here and there in a really beautiful way as well. But it was really amazing how much we were able to pull off.
Congratulations on your work on the show. And thank you so much for talking to me about it today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, we'll see you soon for the group.